Sometimes destiny enters a person's life so quietly that even the wind does not notice. It slips in with the softness of a morning breeze, hiding inside ordinary acts that seem too small to matter. Yet those acts become the turning points of lives that have been wandering in the shadows. On that particular morning, Nora had no idea that something extraordinary was already approaching her, wrapped in the silence of the early hours. She had woken up before sunrise, the way she always did, moving through her tiny roadside food stall with the calm focus of someone who had learned to survive by holding on to hope one day at a time. The air carried the scent of rice, boiling gently in a pot, mixed with the earthy smell of dust rising from the roadside as the day prepared to open its eyes. Her shop stood humbly by the edge of the road, built from wooden planks and topped with a zinc roof that rattled whenever the wind decided to stretch its strength. Despite its simplicity, Nora kept it clean and welcoming. She moved through her routine carefully, setting stools in their usual places, wiping tables with patient strokes, arranging plates as though she were preparing for respected guests. Every gesture she made held a quiet reverence for the life she was trying to build. Her savings box sat tucked in a corner, worn from years of use, but it symbolized everything she hoped for: rent, education, stability. She whispered her dreams to it each night, not out loud, but in her heart, trusting that one day things would shift. Part of her daily rhythm was the presence of a little boy who had begun appearing at her shop. Austin never made noise, never asked for anything directly. He simply sat on the wooden bench beside her stall, with the kind of stillness that did not belong to a child. His clothes were worn, and his frame was thin, but what struck Nora most was the maturity in his eyes, an awareness far deeper than a child should carry. She did not know his story, but she didn't need to. Whenever he appeared, she quietly offered him food. He always accepted with a soft, humble "thank you," spoken in a voice that carried both gratitude and quiet pain. To Nora, it was simple. If she had food to cook, then she had food to share. It didn't matter that she was struggling too. Her heart refused to look away from someone who clearly needed help. Most people ignored Austin. Some stared at him with mild pity before moving on. A few had even made harsh comments about Nora feeding someone who might never repay her kindness, but she brushed it all aside. She understood hardship too well to let judgment blind her compassion. That morning seemed no different from the others. Austin had arrived silently and taken his place on the bench, watching the smoke curl upward from her cooking pot. Nora nodded at him with a gentle smile. He returned it faintly, his eyes warm but tired. The road was calm, carrying the usual early morning rhythm of footsteps, the occasional passing car, and distant voices of traders setting up their stalls. But then something shifted, subtle at first. The footsteps faded, the voices lowered, the atmosphere grew still, as though the world was holding its breath. Nora paused mid-motion, sensing the change even before she understood it. Then she heard it, the low, steady humming of engines approaching in unison. It grew louder, smoother, and heavier than the small vehicles that usually passed by. She turned her head just as 4 sleek black SUVs emerged around the bend, gleaming under the morning sun. They moved with quiet authority, their engines steady and controlled, as though they carried a purpose far greater than the dusty road they traveled. They did not hasten. They did not falter. They simply approached with calm precision, as if destiny itself had set their course. People on the roadside stepped back, staring with confusion and curiosity. These were not ordinary vehicles. They belonged to someone important, someone powerful. Nora felt her breath gather in her chest, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Austin watched silently, his small hands wrapped around each other. The SUVs slowed, then stopped directly in front of her humble shop. Doors began to open. And for the first time that morning, Nora felt the unmistakable tremor of fate. Why have these powerful strangers stopped at Nora's tiny stall? And what truth is about to unfold in front of her eyes? In the hidden corners of Abuja, where shadows linger longer than sunlight, where forgotten buildings stand like tired guardians of stories no one asks about, a small boy begins each day with a mission far heavier than his tiny shoulders should ever bear. Here, childhood does not run or laugh or chase butterflies. Instead, it moves slowly through dusty paths, whispering quiet prayers into the morning air. And among these narrow, neglected spaces, Austin walks, a child of 6, yet shaped by burdens meant for grown men. His journey begins before the sun has fully claimed the sky, long before most children have even opened their sleepy eyes. He rises with the soft groan of a heart that has known hunger too many times and steps into the world with a determination carved from necessity. Inside the unfinished building where he sleeps, silence echoes louder than comfort. The place has no windows, no doors that close properly, no walls that keep out the night's cold breath. Yet it is the only shelter he and his mother have left. Vivian lies on the thin mat inside, a once vibrant woman reduced by illness into a fragile shape of herself. Her breathing is uneven, shallow, sometimes catching as though the air itself is too heavy for her failing body. Kidney failure has stolen her strength, piece by piece, leaving behind a shell that tries to smile for her son, but rarely succeeds. Austin knows her condition more through her eyes than her words. She no longer needs to say she is weak. He feels it every time he touches her hand, senses the trembling beneath her skin. Every morning he bends beside her, whispers softly, "I'm going now, Mommy," and waits for her faint nod. Sometimes she tries to speak, tries to say his name, but her voice cracks, and he hushes her gently. He does not want her to waste the little energy she has left. Instead, he holds her hand for a moment, letting the warmth of his small fingers comfort her before he steps out. Once outside, he walks with a resolve far too steady for a child. His eyes scan the roads, searching for kindness in faces that rarely look back. The sun rises slowly, burning the tops of the buildings first before sliding down to the streets, warming the dust beneath his feet. He whispers the same words every morning, a mantra that fuels his courage. Mommy must eat. It isn't just a statement. It is a promise he keeps renewing. Some children promise to play more, to do well in school, to be quiet at home. But Austin promises survival. He approaches strangers carefully, with respect shaped from desperation. Sometimes people ignore him as if his small voice is just another sound carried by the wind. Others frown, dismissing him with a shake of their head. A few stare at him with pity, but walk away anyway, lost in their own problems. Each rejection lands gently on his heart, creating tiny dents that never fully heal, but still he continues. He must. It does not matter if the sun burns, if hunger claws at his stomach, or if his legs ache from walking. His mother is waiting for him. Every day follows a quiet pattern, walking, whispering, hoping, praying. And yet, despite the erosion of his childhood, there remains a small, steady flame inside him, a stubborn belief that he cannot let his mother starve. This belief sharpens his senses, making him more aware than any child should be. He notices who looks approachable, who is too hurried, who might give a coin, who might offer a piece of bread. His innocence has not vanished. It has simply learned to adapt. Deep within the city's forgotten edges, he walks with a courage born from love, not choice. And while the world rushes past him, unaware of the quiet battle he fights each day, Austin keeps moving forward, carrying hope like a tiny lantern against the overwhelming darkness. What past sorrow crushed this family so deeply that a child now stands as their only line of survival? Before hardship swept her away, and life began pressing its weight upon her shoulders, Vivian had once lived inside the warm glow of possibility. She had dreams of her own, hopes she nurtured carefully, and a heart that believed deeply in the beauty of love. She never imagined that the moment she opened her heart to someone, fate would eventually pull her into a silence so complete it would shape not only her journey, but the future of a child who had not yet been born. In those earlier years, her world felt stable, comforting, and wide with opportunity. Her provision shop stood at the center of it, all small but thriving, built with her own hands and her stubborn commitment to progress. Each morning, she opened its doors with pride, greeting customers with warmth while her shelves displayed grains, milk, biscuits, and everyday essentials that kept the community returning. Vivian carried herself with a quiet confidence, the kind that grew from independence rather than circumstance. She was not wealthy, but she was stable. She lived within her means, planned carefully, saved consistently, and allowed herself the small luxury of dreaming about a future brighter than her present. And within this future, there was one person she imagined by her side, Gabriel. The man who, with his soft-spoken kindness and gentle eyes, had walked into her life and effortlessly made a home there. Their connection began as friendship, built on shared laughter and long conversations beneath trees where students gathered to escape the afternoon heat. Over time, it grew into something deeper, quieter, and more precious. Gabriel was different. Where others complained, he hoped. Where others hesitated, he planned. He dreamed of traveling abroad to pursue a master's degree, not to escape his country, but to bring back knowledge that could build something meaningful. Vivian admired that. His ambition did not feel arrogant. It felt purposeful. And as their bond strengthened, she found herself investing not only her heart in him, but also her trust in his dreams. They spoke often about their future, about marriage someday, about a small home they could build together, humble but filled with peace. Life felt stable. Love felt certain. Everything seemed aligned in a way that made Vivian believe she had finally found her path. When Gabriel received the news of his scholarship abroad, joy overflowed in their small world. But this opportunity came with a challenge. Gabriel did not have the money needed to process his travel documents. He worried, pacing about what would happen if he missed the chance. Vivian, guided by love rather than fear, stepped forward with a determination that surprised even her. She used almost all of her savings to help him, money she had gathered slowly over months by selling provisions one coin at a time. She placed the notes in his hands with a smile that carried both pride and vulnerability, telling him not to worry, telling him to chase his dreams. Gabriel held her hands and promised to return stronger, successful, and ready to build a life with her. For her, that promise was enough. He traveled abroad with tears in his eyes and gratitude in his heart, calling her every day to share stories of his new world. Vivian laughed with him over the phone, imagining the snow he described, the tall buildings he saw, the library he loved. Life felt promising, as if distance had only stretched their connection instead of weakening it. But then, without warning, the silence came. 2 weeks after his arrival, the daily calls stopped. No message arrived. No explanation. Just silence. Cold, abrupt, merciless. At first, Vivian panicked. She called repeatedly, each ring shredding her nerves a little more. She waited hours, then days, her heart pounding with worry rather than anger. She imagined accidents, emergencies, anything that could justify his sudden disappearance. But as more days passed, her hands began trembling, not from fear, but from heartbreak. The man she loved, the future she trusted, the promise she believed in, everything had slipped into emptiness. The silence did not just bruise her, it changed her. and she did not yet know that this silence was carrying a consequence far greater than loneliness. For within that painful quiet, life was forming inside her, life that would grow, breathe, and one day walk the streets in search of food. What invisible force tore their connection apart just when she needed him most? And how would this silence reshape every step that followed? There are moments in life that arrive without warning, moments that shake the foundation of a person's world so deeply that even breathing feels unfamiliar. For Vivian, this moment came wrapped not in joy or celebration, but in disbelief, fear, and a loneliness sharper than any wound she had ever known. Alone, betrayed by a silence she could not understand, and holding on to the fading memory of a love that had once promised the world, she found herself standing at the beginning of a journey she never prepared for. Her strength had always come from planning, from careful steps and structured dreams, but this new reality slipped into her hands suddenly, leaving her heart trembling and her future clouded. The day she discovered she was pregnant began like any other, yet it carried a heaviness she could not name. She had been feeling unwell, tired in a way that sleep could not fix, nauseous in the early hours, sensitive to smells that never bothered her before. At first, she dismissed it as stress. Gabriel's sudden disappearance had left her emotionally drained, and she assumed her body was simply reacting to the weight of heartbreak. But when the symptoms grew too consistent to ignore, she gathered the courage to visit the hospital. With each step toward the clinic, her heart pounded harder, echoing fears she had never allowed herself to consider. Sitting in the waiting room, staring at the white walls and clean floors, she felt small, exposed, and vulnerable. When the doctor finally returned with her test results, his expression softened in a way that made her stomach twist. His voice was gentle, but the words struck her like a wave she could not outrun. She was pregnant. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Her breath caught in her chest. For a moment she could not speak. She simply stared at him, her mind frozen in disbelief. The doctor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, speaking softly, but Vivian heard only fragments. Pregnant. Alone. Gabriel gone. Silence. Silence where his voice should have been. Silence where promises once lived. She walked home in a haze, the city blurring into colors and shapes that held no meaning. Inside her shop, she sat on a small stool and placed her hands on her stomach gently, as though afraid the truth might shatter if touched too harshly. Gabriel's face filled her mind, his smile, his dreams, his promises. Questions spiraled inside her. Why had he stopped calling? Was he hurt? Had he changed his number? Had something terrible happened? Or worse, had he simply forgotten her? Each possibility broke her heart a different way, yet none of them changed the reality forming inside her. Vivian spent days wrestling with fear. Her shop was still functioning, but she moved through it like someone walking underwater, slow, heavy, distracted. She whispered prayers at night, asking for clarity, for strength, for a sign. The world felt colder, harsher, and she had never felt more alone. And then, one evening, as she sat in the quiet corner of her shop after closing, she made her decision. Not because she had found courage, and not because the future had suddenly become clear, but because love, pure, steady love, rose above the fear trying to drown her. She chose to keep the child. She chose to become a mother, even without Gabriel by her side. She chose to give life, even when her own felt like it was falling apart. And in making that choice, she discovered a new kind of strength, one that did not shout or boast, but lived quietly inside her chest, guiding her forward. Months passed, each one filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She continued working at her shop, holding her growing stomach gently each night as she lay down to sleep. When Austin finally arrived, the world felt both softer and louder. His tiny cries filled the small room she lived in, and his presence wrapped her heart in warmth she hadn't felt since Gabriel left. She held him close, studying his little face, his nose, his fingers, his eyes, and something deep inside her settled. She was no longer alone. She had someone to protect, someone to nurture, someone to love without condition. Their life was small, but it was theirs. Vivian worked tirelessly, balancing motherhood and her shop with quiet dignity. She sang to Austin, told him stories, and whispered hopes into his tiny ears. Even though money was tight and sleep was scarce, love filled their days with meaning. People who visited her shop often commented on how lively and joyful Austin was, how his laughter brightened the space. And Vivian believed that perhaps, despite everything, life had offered her a new beginning. But the world was not done testing her. For while she poured her heart into raising her child, a storm she could not yet see was already gathering at the edge of their fragile peace, waiting for its moment to strike. What storm was waiting to break the fragile peace she built for her son? And how would it change the path of their lives forever? There are illnesses that weaken the body slowly, draining strength one careful breath at a time, but there are others that do not stop at the body. They reach into the heart of a family and begin stripping away everything that once held them together. They steal dreams, empty bank accounts, silence laughter, and replace hope with worry so heavy it alters the rhythm of every day. Vivian had faced hardship before, but nothing prepared her for the quiet cruelty of the sickness that crept into her life and began dismantling the future she worked so hard to build. It began subtly, just tiredness at first, exhaustion that felt like stress, weakness she brushed aside. But little by little, the symptoms grew too loud to ignore. One morning, while preparing to open her shop, Vivian felt her legs weaken beneath her. She reached for the counter to steady herself, but her hands trembled violently. Her vision blurred. Her breath came unevenly. Austin, still very young but unusually attentive, rushed toward her with frightened eyes. She tried to smile, tried to reassure him, but the moment she opened her mouth, the room spun around her, and she sank to the ground in a slow collapse that frightened her son deeply. Neighbors rushed her to the hospital, and in the cold, sterile examination room, surrounded by machines that beeped steadily without emotion, Vivian waited for answers she already feared. When the doctor returned, his expression held that familiar mixture of professionalism and pity reserved for news no one wants to deliver. He sat down gently, as if the weight of what he carried might break the chair. His words fell like stones. Kidney failure, advanced, dangerous, a condition that would require dialysis 2 times a week until a transplant could be found. Vivian stared at him, her heart sinking deeper with each word. She thought of her son, of her small shop, of the life she had scraped together from brokenness. She felt the ground shift beneath her, as though the world had quietly decided to test her once again. At first, she tried to fight back. She attended her dialysis sessions, forcing a smile for Austin whenever she returned home, drained, pale, and trembling. She continued running her shop, though slowly, painfully, because she refused to let sickness take everything. But dialysis was expensive, far more expensive than her modest income could sustain. Each session demanded money she didn't have. Week by week, bill by bill, her savings vanished. The coins she once placed into her saving box with hope now disappeared into hospital fees and medication. When her savings ended, she began selling the things she once relied on. First, it was the freezer, the very heart of her small business. Then the shelves she had bought slowly over the years. Then the wooden table. Each sale chipped away at her stability. Each item lost felt like losing a piece of herself. And still, it was never enough. The illness demanded more, Always more. Soon she could no longer pay rent. The landlord, though sympathetic, had responsibilities of his own, and eventually gave her notice. The day she carried Austin out of their home, the door closing behind her for the last time, she felt an ache so deep it nearly swallowed her. She held her son with one hand and her remaining belongings with the other, trying to smile through tears she could no longer hide. Austin, sensing her sadness, clung to her quietly. The world around them moved as usual. Cars passing, people talking, children laughing. But for Vivian, everything felt distant, muffled, unreal, as though she had stepped into a version of life where nothing was stable anymore. They found shelter in the corner of an unfinished building, a place without comfort, without safety, without warmth. The floor was hard and dusty. The air was cold. The walls were cracked, but it was all they could afford. Vivian swept the space with trembling hands, spreading the thin mat she had left, and arranging their few belongings around them. She tried to make it feel like home, but the emptiness of the structure made every effort feel fragile. At night, she lay there, listening to the wind slip through the open spaces, her body aching from sickness, her heart aching from loss. The worst part was watching Austin leave school. She had fought so hard to give him an education, saving every spare coin to pay for his fees, buying him small toys to brighten his days, teaching him songs and rhymes to strengthen his mind. Now his notebooks lay untouched, his uniform folded away, his dreams paused because survival demanded all their attention. Austin, innocent and loving, never complained. Instead, he whispered to her, saying he understood, saying he would be strong. But his tiny voice broke her heart every time. And through all of it, the sickness, the losses, the forced relocation, Austin became her caretaker, her strength, her silent warrior. His small hands wiped her forehead when she felt faint. His feet carried him across the roads in search of food when she was too weak to move. He looked at her with eyes that carried more responsibility than childhood should ever know. But how long, she wondered through her pain, could a 6-year-old carry the weight of a world already collapsing around them? How long can a 6-year-old hold up a world that's already collapsing? And what force will step into their lives before everything shatters completely? Sometimes help arrives not through grand gestures or loud declarations, but through the quiet noticing of a heart that refuses to overlook suffering. In a world where people rush past one another, too busy to see the pain lingering in small shadows, the universe often sends its miracles through the eyes of those who still pause long enough to care. And on that scorching afternoon, while the city hummed with noise and movement, a single tired child wandering the roadside held a story on the brink of breaking. Most people did not look closely enough to see it, but Nora did. Austin had been walking since morning, his little body trembling under the heat of the sun. Hunger gnawed at him with a quiet persistence, reminding him of the empty room he would return to, where his mother lay, weak and silent. He approached strangers with small, hopeful eyes, whispering gentle pleas that often went unheard. Some people waved him off with impatience, others did not even turn their heads, and a few stared briefly before moving on with indifference. He swallowed the sting of rejection each time, not because it hurt any less, but because he had no choice. Survival demanded persistence, even when hope felt fragile. By midday, his legs felt heavy, his throat dry, and his heart weighed down by the quiet loneliness of being unseen. He walked slowly along the roadside until he reached Nora's little food shop, a place he had never entered, but had passed by countless times. The smell of steaming rice drifted through the air, carrying warmth his empty stomach recognized with longing. The small wooden bench beside the shop looked inviting, shaded just enough to offer brief relief from the sun. Austin climbed onto it gently, folding his hands in his lap, sitting still as though afraid to draw attention. He did not beg this time. He simply waited, letting the world pass by him in a blur of footsteps. Inside the shop, Nora moved with her usual quiet rhythm, wiping plates, arranging bowls, and clearing tables after the lunch rush. But something outside caught her attention, a kind of stillness that didn't belong to the noise around her. When she stepped out to check the drying plates, she noticed him. A thin little boy, with tired eyes, legs dangling just above the dusty ground, sitting in a silence far too deep for someone his age. His clothes were worn, his skin slightly pale, and the shadows beneath his eyes told stories of long nights and empty meals. Nora paused, her heart tightening in a way she didn't expect. Many children passed her shop, some playful, some mischievous, some loud. But this one was different. This boy was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the quiet that comes from carrying more pain than words can express. She walked toward him slowly, not wanting to startle him. When she reached him, she bent slightly to meet his gaze and asked softly, "Are you okay?" His eyes lifted to hers with a mixture of hope and fear, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His whole body spoke for him. Without asking another question, Nora turned and went inside. She scooped food onto a plate, warm, filling, something that could bring life back into a child's eyes, and returned to him. When she held the plate out, Austin's face softened, the faintest spark of relief lighting up his expression. He murmured, "Thank you," with a sincerity that settled gently into her heart. But just when she expected him to eat, he held the plate carefully and looked up again with a request that surprised her. "Auntie, please, do you have nylon? Or small packs?" Nora blinked, puzzled. Most hungry children would have devoured the food immediately, yet this boy wanted to carry it away. Something deeper was hidden in his request, something that had nothing to do with himself and everything to do with someone waiting in the shadows of a forgotten building. And in that moment, Nora realized she was not just feeding a hungry child. She was standing at the edge of a story far more complicated than she imagined. Why does the boy ask for a nylon bag instead of eating immediately? And what truth is he trying to protect with such urgency? Behind every starving child lies a truth deeper than hunger, one shaped not by empty plates alone, but by sacrifice, silence, and a love so fierce it continues fighting, even when the world has stripped everything away. For Austin, hunger was only the surface of a much wider, heavier story, and the moment he left Nora's shop clutching the food pack tightly against his chest, that truth followed him in the rapid beating of his heart and the urgency in his small steps. He ran not for himself, but for someone waiting in the dim shadows of an unfinished room, a mother whose life was slowly dripping away, like water from a cracked cup. As he approached the building, dust rose around his feet, and the familiar creak of the leaning wooden board they used as a makeshift door greeted him. He slipped inside quietly, almost reverently, as though entering a sacred place. The air felt heavy with a stillness that always made him anxious. Vivian lay on the mat, exactly where he had left her, her eyes half open, the weakness in her body so deep it seemed to have settled into her bones. She looked up at him with a faint smile, one that tried to hide the pain etched into her features, but could not fully conceal it. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, tired rhythm, each breath a quiet battle. "Mommy, I'm back," Austin whispered, kneeling beside her. He placed the food carefully on the mat and hurried to the corner where their plastic plates sat. His tiny hands trembled as he washed one with a little water, trying so hard to clean it properly, as if presenting a perfect plate could somehow make the meal more comforting for her. When he returned, he opened the food pack gently, scooping a small portion into the plate. Vivian watched him silently, her eyes shining with both gratitude and pain. He brought the spoon to her lips with the tenderness of someone far older, someone who had learned through necessity how to care, how to nurture, how to love in action rather than words. Each spoonful he lifted was slow, careful, guided by his fear of overwhelming her. He waited after every bite, watching her expression to ensure she could swallow. Her voice was faint when she whispered, "Thank you, my son." Austin nodded, focused more on feeding her than replying. When she had eaten enough, he lifted a cup of water to her lips, guiding it, gently, so she would not spill. Afterwards, he took a cloth and wiped her mouth with the same soft motions she once used on him when he was younger. In those moments, the roles between them blurred, mother and child blending into a quiet exchange of survival. When she finally rested back against the mat, her eyes glistened with tears. "God bless the woman who helped you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "May she never lack. May her life never know sorrow." Austin listened, his expression soft but serious. He knew those blessings came from a place of deep gratitude, one shaped by days without food, and nights filled with fear of what tomorrow might bring. Later, when Austin ate his own small portion in the corner of the room, he did so silently, his thoughts drifting back to Nora, the woman who had looked at him and truly seen him. Not the dirt on his clothes, not the hunger in his eyes, but the child beneath the struggle. And miles away, Nora sat on her small mattress, replaying the image of the boy in her mind. Something about him refused to leave her thoughts. His quietness, his politeness, the sorrow behind his eyes, and especially the way he had asked for a nylon bag instead of eating. Every detail tugged at her curiosity and her heart. She knew he was hiding something, not out of mischief, but out of fear and loyalty to someone he loved. The mystery wrapped around him like a thin veil, and the more she thought about it, the more she felt that stepping closer to his world might reveal a truth that would break her heart and deepen her compassion. What hidden truth will Nora uncover if she decides to follow the fragile footsteps of this little boy? Sometimes a person steps into another's suffering without realizing that the moment their foot crosses that invisible line, something begins to shift. Quietly, slowly, but powerfully. What starts as simple compassion turns into a bond deeper than anything blood alone can create. It becomes a lifeline, a shelter, a connection born not from shared origin, but shared pain. For Nora, this transformation began on the very day she chose to notice a little boy sitting alone, and it deepened with every step he took back into her world. Austin returned to her food stall the next day, and the next, and every day after that, carrying the same gentle humility, the same tired eyes, the same small but sincere smile. With each visit, the air around them softened, and a quiet bond began forming, fragile yet full of meaning. Nora found herself watching for him, waiting for his small footsteps, wondering how early he might come. She began preparing a little extra food before the morning rush, setting aside a plate she didn't tell anyone about. She didn't do it out of pity. She did it because kindness had already opened a door in her heart, and Austin had stepped inside without realizing it. There was something about the boy that stirred a deep tenderness in her, something that made her want to protect him, to understand him, to give him more than a passing act of generosity. He helped her, too, in small ways. When the shop became busy, he would sweep a corner or wash a small stack of plates, insisting on contributing even when she urged him to rest. His little hands moved with purpose, and his quiet determination reminded Nora of herself. But the more she watched him, the more questions rose inside her. His politeness felt too precise, too careful for a child his age. His hunger ran deeper than the food he accepted. His eyes always drifted toward the road, as if measuring the time he could spare before needing to return somewhere unseen. Nora sensed a story hidden behind all of this, one he was too young to explain. She could not shake the feeling that he wasn't just hungry. He was carrying responsibility far heavier than any child should. One evening, after handing him a food pack carefully tied in a nylon bag, she bent down and asked softly, "Austin, can I meet your mother someday?" The question came out gently, but its weight settled between them. Austin's breath caught for a moment. He looked down, rubbing his fingers together, as though trying to gather courage from the motion. When he finally nodded, it was small and hesitant, yet full of trust. "You can come," he whispered. "Mommy will like you." 2 days later, Nora followed Austin home. As they walked, the streets shifted from familiar to forgotten, from lively to quiet, from bright to dim. He led her through dusty paths and narrow spaces until they reached the unfinished building he called home. Nora's heart clenched the moment she stepped inside. The room was painfully empty, just a thin mat on the floor, a few scattered belongings, and air heavy with the scent of struggle. Vivian lay in the corner, her body frail, her face pale, her breathing labored. But when she saw Nora standing beside her son, something warm flickered in her weary eyes. "Good evening, Ma," Nora said softly, kneeling beside her. Vivian tried to sit up but couldn't. Tears pooled at the corners of her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you for helping my child." Nora took her hand gently, the warmth of their connection forming instantly. In that moment, she understood the full weight Austin had been carrying. She saw the silent wounds in the room, the sickness, the poverty, the sacrifices, the quiet fights to survive each day. And she felt something shift inside her, a resolve building with quiet strength. From that day forward, Nora became their pillar, bringing food, comfort, presence, and hope. Not because she sought praise, but because she had walked into their darkness and found a truth too heavy to ignore. And once she found it, she couldn't walk away. What she did not know was that far away, a man from Vivian's past was returning, a man searching for the family he had unknowingly lost. Meanwhile, far away, a man from Vivian's past is returning, searching for what he lost, unaware that fate is guiding him back toward the very people he left behind. Success can fill a man's pockets and surround him with luxury and comfort, but it cannot silence the ghosts of the heart. It cannot quiet the memory of a woman whose kindness shaped his beginnings, whose love gave strength to his earliest dreams, or whose sacrifice carried him farther than he could ever repay. For Gabriel, the world had applauded his accomplishments, celebrated his brilliance, and crowned him one of the most influential minds of his generation. Yet beneath the polished exterior, beneath the tailored suits and glowing interviews, lived a silence he had carried for years, one shaped by a woman named Vivian, the woman he had once loved, the woman he believed he had lost forever. When his private jet touched down on Nigerian soil after years abroad, he felt a heaviness settle over him, a quiet tension that sat between his ribs, like an unspoken truth. Even his luxurious surroundings, the polished leather seats, the soft hum of engines winding down, the glow of city lights stretching across the horizon, could not distract him from the thoughts circling his mind. He stepped onto the tarmac with a face that appeared calm to others, but inside him, old memories stirred like dust rising after a long sleep. He had returned not for business, not for investment projects, not for any public appearance. He had returned because the ache in his heart had grown too heavy to ignore. He never meant to abandon Vivian. The world saw him as a man of power, but only he knew the wounds that shaped him. In those early days abroad, when he was still adjusting to a world he had never known, disaster had struck. His phone was stolen during a late-night walk, taken by a group of strangers who vanished before he could understand what had happened. With that phone went everything. Vivian's number, her texts, their voice notes, every link to the life he left behind. He tried everything he could to retrieve her contact, searching through emails, searching through old records, asking friends who might have known her. But nothing worked. It was as though the world had swallowed her name, leaving him with an emptiness that grew deeper each day. Though he was building success abroad, studying, working, struggling, then rising, he carried her memory like a quiet companion. He thought of her whenever he walked past a grocery store, remembering how she arranged her provision shop with pride. He thought of her when he achieved milestones, imagining how she would smile and say, "I knew you could do it." But as the years passed without any sign of her, the fear crept in. Had she moved on? Had she forgotten him? Had life treated her kindly, or broken her in his absence? Gabriel expected to find her living her dreams, running her shop, maybe even married with a family. But the moment he returned to their old neighborhood and stepped into the dusty courtyard, where their paths, once intertwined, he sensed immediately that time had not been kind to her. It was an elderly woman who recognized him first, her eyes widening with surprise as she called his name. He rushed toward her with hope burning in his chest. "Mama, please, do you know where Vivian is?" Her sigh was long, heavy, and filled with memories she had witnessed quietly over the years. She had seen the struggles, the tears, the collapse of a young woman who had once been full of life. She told him the truth. Vivian had discovered she was pregnant shortly after he left. She had tried to reach him, but the silence never broke. She raised the child alone. She fought sickness alone. And when her life began to fall apart, she had no choice but to leave the neighborhood, carrying her son with her into a darkness no one understood. Gabriel felt the words pierce him like cold rain. A son. Vivian had his child, and she had suffered all alone while he spent years believing she had perhaps moved on. His knees nearly weakened beneath him as he absorbed the truth, and for a moment he could not speak. A weight he had never known settled heavily on his shoulders, a mixture of guilt, sorrow, and a fierce determination he had never felt before. He thanked the elderly woman with a voice that trembled under the pressure of newfound responsibility. As he walked back to his car, the world around him blurred. His wealth suddenly felt meaningless. His accomplishments felt hollow. The only thought filling his heart was this: he had a family he never knew, and he would not lose them again. That day, Gabriel made a promise to himself. He would search every corner of the city, every street, every forgotten space. He would overturn every stone until he found Vivian and the son he never had the chance to hold. No matter the cost, no matter the time, he would bring them back into the light. But fate, always watching, had already chosen a surprising path for him, one that would lead him to the most unexpected place. Where will fate lead Gabriel in this desperate search? And what revelation waits at the end of this long journey back into the past he lost? Sometimes the universe guides footsteps with an accuracy no human eye can understand, pulling strangers, memories, and long-lost truths toward a single point where everything, hope, pain, regret, and revelation, collides in one breath. On the morning Gabriel set out for a remote charity outreach, he believed he was simply fulfilling a promise to help the forgotten corners of the city. Surrounded by a convoy of black SUVs, he gazed through the tinted window as the landscape shifted from polished roads to dusty, faded stretches, where survival depended not on comfort, but on resilience. He had no idea that destiny was steering him gently, almost invisibly, toward a place that would change the course of his life forever. The deeper they drove, the more uneasy he felt. Hunger pressed lightly at his stomach, but he ignored it, too, focused on the thoughts swirling in his mind, thoughts of Vivian, of the life she lived after his departure, of the son he had never met and could only imagine. The road narrowed until it became little more than a rough path, carved by years of footsteps and worn-out tires. He glanced at his driver and almost asked him to turn back, but something in the air held him still, urging him to continue. Then, quite suddenly, a small roadside food shop appeared ahead. Smoke curled gently from a pot outside, rising in a shaky column that caught the sunlight. The place was simple, almost insignificant, but it carried a kind of warmth that stood out against the harshness of the surroundings. "Stop here," Gabriel said, the words coming to him before he fully understood why. The vehicles halted, and as he stepped out, the sound of gravel crunching under his shoes seemed unusually loud, as though the world wanted to mark this exact moment. He was about to walk inside when something pulled at him, a soft motion, a whisper of movement at the edge of his vision. He turned, and there he saw him. A small boy, washing plates beside the shop with a seriousness far too deep for someone so young. His posture, his concentration, the careful way he scrubbed each plate as though it mattered. Everything about the child struck Gabriel with unexpected force. There was something familiar in the boy's eyes, a quiet resilience that stirred his heart before he could explain it. He watched him for a long moment, unable to look away. Then he stepped closer and asked gently, "What is your name?" The boy looked up with shy caution. "Austin," he said softly. The name echoed inside Gabriel like a distant bell, faint yet powerful enough to unsettle his breath. Before Gabriel could ask another question, Nora approached with a respectful greeting. Her presence was calm, but her eyes carried the depth of someone who had learned to see beyond appearances. Gabriel asked her why the boy wasn't in school, why he was working instead of learning or playing. Nora hesitated, glancing at Austin with a tenderness that revealed her concern. Then she spoke the truth. His mother was gravely ill. They lived in an unfinished building. They had nothing, no money, no food security, no future except the one this child tried to hold together with his tiny hands. As she spoke, something shifted inside Gabriel. Slow, deep, undeniable. It wasn't sympathy. It was recognition, though he didn't yet understand why. The more he looked at the child, the more he sensed that fate was placing pieces before him that he had overlooked for years. It felt as if the universe had been circling him through unfamiliar paths, only to bring him here, to this dusty corner where a little boy fought to survive. With a voice that carried both urgency and restraint, he asked, "Can I meet his mother?" Nora studied him carefully, wary of strangers who asked too many questions. But something in Gabriel's tone, its sincerity, its ache, disarmed her. She nodded slowly and agreed to take him. They climbed into the SUV, and the convoy followed behind as Austin led them through winding, narrow routes toward the forgotten edges of the community. Each turn deepened Gabriel's unease, his heart pounding faster with questions he couldn't name. When they finally arrived at the crumbling building, Austin stepped out first and pushed aside the wooden board that served as their door. Gabriel followed, and the moment he looked into the dim room, the air left his lungs. What will Gabriel find in the dark room where Austin sleeps? And how will the truth waiting inside reshape everything he thought he knew? When he stepped inside that broken room, time seemed to halt, suspended between the echoes of his past and the reality standing before him. The dim space carried the stale scent of sickness and struggle, but what froze Gabriel in place was not the poverty, nor the emptiness, nor the silence. It was the sight of a woman lying weakly on a thin mat, her breath shallow, her eyes dull with exhaustion. Vivian. The woman who had once filled his world with warmth and laughter. The woman whose love had built his first dream. The woman he had searched for with a heart full of guilt and longing. And now she lay before him, broken by years he wished he could reclaim. His knees nearly gave way. He whispered her name, soft, fragile, trembling, as though afraid the sound itself might shatter her. Vivian opened her eyes slowly, struggling to focus. At first she blinked with confusion, but when his face sharpened into clarity, her breath caught. "Gabriel." The word escaped her like a memory fighting its way through pain. For a moment neither moved, bound by the shock of seeing what both had feared was lost forever. Then Gabriel rushed forward, calling his guards with urgency that cracked through the silence. He commanded them to lift her gently, his voice breaking each time he repeated her name. Austin watched in confusion, clutching Nora's hand tightly as strangers carried his mother out with speed and care he had never seen. Nora held him close, whispering assurances even though her own heart trembled at the intensity of what she had just witnessed. Within minutes, the convoy sped toward the hospital, engines roaring through the dusty roads as though racing against time itself. At the hospital, doctors moved swiftly, drawing blood, running tests, checking the severity of her condition. Gabriel stood outside the emergency room, pacing like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. For years he had imagined meeting Vivian again, perhaps in a shop, or a street, or even by chance at a market, but never like this. Not with her life hanging by a thread. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression carried both urgency and hope. Vivian could live, he said, but she needed a kidney transplant quickly, and as if destiny itself had orchestrated every step, Gabriel did not hesitate. Without waiting for explanations or alternatives, he volunteered to donate his own kidney. The surgery was long, delicate, and demanding. Hours passed as doctors worked tirelessly to save Vivian's life. Nora sat with Austin in one corner of the waiting room, watching the boy's small hands clasped tightly together in prayer. She had never seen him so still, so focused, so afraid. Gabriel's guards watched in quiet concern, aware that their employer was fighting his own battle behind the doors of the operating theater. When the light above the room finally shifted, signaling the end of the surgery, everyone rose to their feet with mixed fear and hope. The doctors stepped out with relief on their faces. The transplant had been successful. Vivian would live. Gabriel, too, was stable. The news washed over Austin like a soft wave of light, loosening the tight knot of fear gripping his chest. Nora squeezed his shoulders gently, whispering gratitude under her breath. But none of them fully understood the depth of what had just happened, that a man who had once vanished from Vivian's world had now given a part of himself to keep her alive. Days later, Vivian awoke slowly in a quiet hospital room. The crisp smell of disinfectant mixed with the softness of white sheets filled her senses. Her body felt different, lighter, stronger, yet her heart carried bruises from the ordeal. When Gabriel entered the room, still weak from his own surgery, but standing tall with determination, Vivian's eyes softened. He moved to her bedside, his gaze full of emotions he had hidden for years: regret, tenderness, relief, and love. They spoke through tears, unraveling the painful story that had separated them. He explained how his phone was stolen, how he lost every way to reach her, how he spent years trying to find her again. Vivian told him about her pregnancy, her struggles, the silence that broke her heart. Their voices blended into a reunion filled with truth, healing, and unfinished love that finally found its way home. But one truth still waited outside this room, small and fragile, yet powerful enough to change everything. What will Austin do when he discovers that the man who saved his mother's life is the father he never knew he had? Miracles rarely arrive with thunder or bright flashes of light. More often, they begin in the quietest corners of life, carried by hands that never expect recognition, born from choices so simple they almost go unnoticed. Nora never imagined that the meal she handed to a starving child would become the spark that rebuilt an entire family. She simply fed a boy because her heart refused to turn away. Yet her kindness, planted in the soil of someone else's suffering, grew into a miracle that touched lives across continents, healed wounds buried beneath years of silence, and restored a future that had nearly been lost forever. When Vivian finally grew strong enough to return home after the transplant, Austin waited anxiously, pacing the living room of Gabriel's mansion. His small hands twisted together, his heart racing with equal parts excitement and uncertainty. He still did not understand the full picture, but he knew something important was coming. When the door opened and his mother stepped inside, walking with strength he had not seen in years, he ran into her arms with a cry that cracked open the room. Vivian held him tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the miracle of simply standing again and holding her child without pain pulling her down. Gabriel watched them quietly, his heart full, yet trembling with the truth he needed to reveal. When Vivian finally sat down, he approached Austin slowly, kneeling so their eyes met at the same level. The boy stared back with innocent curiosity, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Gabriel's voice was gentle, steady, shaped by love and years of longing. He told Austin the truth, that he was his father, the man whose absence had not been abandonment, but a painful twist of fate. Austin blinked, processing the words slowly, his small chest rising and falling with emotion. Then, in a shy, uncertain whisper, he asked, "You are my daddy?" When Gabriel nodded, the boy stepped forward hesitantly, then wrapped his arms around him in a fragile embrace that carried years of longing neither of them had understood until that moment. From that day, Gabriel refused to let them return to struggle. Vivian and Austin moved permanently into his mansion, a place filled with warmth, light, and possibilities they had never dared to imagine. Austin explored rooms bigger than their entire former home, his laughter echoing like music through the halls. Vivian, once trapped by sickness and fear, now walked with renewed confidence, her future no longer dictated by pain, but by hope restored. Gabriel made sure every need was met, every comfort provided, every fear eased. He did not do it out of duty, he did it out of love, out of gratitude, out of a deep desire to give them the life they deserved. But Gabriel's gratitude did not stop with his family. He also turned toward the woman whose simple kindness had changed everything. Nora returned to her small room one evening, only to find Gabriel waiting with news that made her knees weaken. He offered her a new apartment, a place safe, clean, and worthy of the heart she carried. He ensured she could continue her education without worry, paying her tuition and giving her the chance to pursue the future she had once believed was too far away. And then, in a gesture that left her speechless, he handed her the keys to a brand new restaurant bearing her name, a place where her passion could bloom into success while employed workers handled operations during her studies. Nora's tears flowed silently as she realized the magnitude of what her simple act of kindness had returned to her. She had fed a hungry child without knowing she was feeding hope back into her own destiny. Vivian and Gabriel soon married in a ceremony filled with joy, gratitude, and the quiet triumph of two hearts reunited. Austin stood between them, holding both their hands, smiling with a peace he had never known. And all of it, every restored breath, every healed wound, every new beginning, started with one small act of compassion. All of this happened because a woman chose kindness. What miracles still wait for those who dare to choose compassion in a world that desperately needs it? If this story touched your heart, don't leave quietly. Your voice matters here. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me what part moved you the most. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next powerful story waiting to unfold. And if you believe kindness can still change lives, like this video and share it with someone who needs hope today. Your support keeps these stories alive.